we go. So I'm going to, hello everyone. Falchadavula, smar feich gina nach. Smisha frangak nichachen, agus sauna shudik vekahami. Hello everyone. It's great to see you all here tonight for our session of Gaelic. I'm Frances MacEachen and I'm your Benenthai for tonight. I'm your host. And so I would just mention I'm in Little Judik, but I should say I want to acknowledge that I'm also speaking to you from Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. And this is our first session of Gaelic, the Gaelic Narrative Project for 2022. And tonight's session is one in a series of sessions we'll have on Friday nights at this time until the end of February. So lots of great sessions to attend coming up. And last year, many of you joined us. We had 6 sessions. And if you didn't get to see those, they're online on our website, howwethrive.org. And this year, again, here we're gathering again, and we're facing some challenges with COVID that doesn't allow us to gather in person or to go to dances or Kayleys or anything like that. So I'm really grateful that we have this chance to gather online where we can share some stories and hear some songs. Sometimes we share some music and sometimes share ideas and stories and meet old friends and make some new friends. So the purpose of Gaelic is to create a welcoming and a convivial space where we share moments and stories that speak to our connection with Gaelic language, culture, and community. And through telling and listening to our stories, we shed light on the stories and the narratives that we'd like more of in our life. And also at the same time, the stories and narratives that no longer serve us, that maybe are best to leave behind. And by sharing and doing this collectively, we make meaning and we can imagine new possibilities for Gaelic language and culture in our lives and in our communities. So this year, the focus and the theme is on the Gaelic word leór, which means both enough and plenty. And we'll explore this theme in terms of community, language, and cultural revitalization and youth as well. And tonight, actually, one of my guests has written a book on the subject of enough, and we'll meet her later as well as another special guest. But as you know, if you've been here before, you know, the first thing we do to kick off is that we greet each other and we meet each other in the breakout rooms. So as I mentioned, if you want to go to a Gaelic breakout room, just put a G in front of your name, and then we'll be able to organize everybody accordingly. The second great breakout room will be in English, so people will mix it up, so everyone will get to meet different people. And the breakout rooms in Gaelic, they follow a particular pattern. We put 3 people in each breakout room, and we offer questions for you to consider. And after you greet each other, we ask that one person answers the questions and the others just listen. And when that person's finished, the next person speaks and the other listens, and so on. And this just ensures that everybody gets a chance to share. And it is also a chance for us to practice listening. It's a real gift to listen to each other's stories. And it's important to participate. So if you do find yourself in a room where you're on your own, or you're speaking to yourself and don't stay there, come on back out and our tech people will put you in another room. So each person has about 3 minutes, and then maybe somebody in the group will volunteer as a timekeeper. And we put the questions in the chat. They'll follow you into the room and we'll give you some notice on timing. So the questions we're offering tonight are, what is something in your life that you wish everyone in the world had too? And as a follow-up, what are some things that you're grateful for? Now, it's really important to stress that there are no right or wrong answers to these questions. So I tested this question on someone, and I asked her, you know, what is something that you wish everyone in the world would have? And she said, my pink coat with white polka dots. And then she asked me, she said, well, what would you think of? And I said, well, I kind of would think of something like clean water or something like that. So there's no right or wrong. There's going to be a lot of diverse answers, and there's no right or wrong answer. And it's just important for us to get us thinking about what we have that we appreciate. So Shanaka Shin, off we go to our rooms, and Bishinner Feinking and Countach. Get back. I hope you had enjoyed your breakout room. We had a wonderful one, talking about the things, the very basic things that we are very appreciative of. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our special guests. One woman I've known for probably 30 years or so, and the other I just met really recently, very recently, by Googling her. Now, if I said that 30 years ago, that would have a whole other meaning, but you know what I mean now. So I'm really grateful that we have the technology, not only to meet tonight, but so that I could allowed me to discover the work of Anne Ryan of Ireland, and also to connect with her. And Anne has a PhD in adult and community education. And she's developed a philosophy and a practice of enough, which she will speak about tonight. And she's led workshops, has written books and articles on enough. This one here, this is a book by Anne, it's called Enough is Plenty, and public and private policies for the 21st century. She's been active locally, nationally, and internationally to help create a more just and ecologically sustainable world. She's a founding member of the Derrybeg Community Supported Farm in her hometown of Kilbridge, County Kildare. She was coordinator of the National Network Basic Income Ireland for 10 years, and is an active member and former trustee of Fiesta, the Foundation for Economics of Sustainability. She'll correct me on that pronunciation. She's also an Irish speaker, and it was our shared understanding of the word leór that connected us through the internet. And with us tonight also is Mary Jane Lamond, who probably needs no introduction with this group. She's been learning, researching, and singing Gaelic songs for a few decades now, and has been offering this beautiful gift to both local and international
just since
audiences.
I was 5, Frances.
Just a few decades. During her career, Mary Jane has released 5 CDs and was both nominated for and received many awards, including the prestigious Portia White Prize for Cultural and Artistic Excellence. And Mary Jane knows the benefits of having a rich cultural life and how much it contributes to the health and well-being of citizens. And when not performing, Mary Jane is active in many culturally driven initiatives. And she's presently working on a project called Language and Lyrics, which is a project to create a database of Gaelic song in Nova Scotia. So, Falchard of Nji Shako, Alna Agus Mariana. Mari Sheena, Midoli. Mary Jane, I was wondering, I thought it would be good if you could maybe kick us off with a song. And I was wondering about if it was a song that might connect with our theme of enough, or a leór.
I think it's kind of I've been thinking so much about this in terms of Gaelic songs and stuff, but I'm gonna sing a song. I think Ian Gavilna Fakwan the Brian and Akat Gen changed. I think McLeod's going to put it up in the chat so you can see the song. So it's a song that was composed by the Bard MacLean before he came to Nova Scotia. And it's this Angus MacNeil. I don't want to get in, I know our time is kind of short, so I'm just going to say that it's about a fellow who's working for the Bard MacLean's father and left the farm in Tiree and went down to the lowlands to seek out his fortune. And from the Bard perspective, he was asked by Angus MacNeil to compose this song, and he composed the song, and he's just talking about how rough it was on Angus to leave the place where he thought that he wanted to have more, and he left, but then he's down in the lowlands. He doesn't have the language. He's got these old, he talks about, you know, the promises that were made to him, and he couldn't understand what was going on. And he's just sending his wishes back and wishing he was back home, really.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I struggle to find a song that says we have everything. There are some, but this one and I'll tell you why afterwards. Why another reason I chose the song is because the circumstances in which I learned it were
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
in the sense of plenty. So I'm just gonna give it a shot. And I hate to do this, and I hate it when singers do this, but I do have to say that just for my friends, who, if you see me struggling a little bit, it's because I fell about 3 weeks ago and I think I cracked a rib. So it's just getting better. So if I feel like I look like I'm really struggling for breath, it's not because I'm really seriously ill. I'm just clumsy.
Ladyhead.
Okay. Oh, Arun's got a two. Oh, and I guess we should say that it'd be better if everybody went on mute. It's going to be a bit easier if maybe that's already done. Oh, Arun's got a two and matter. Oh, Arun's got a two and matter. To hein Arun's got a two and matter. Gareta hoekruk hachi en fanjerkan. Gaat ook found mak trouw met manjo. Gaat jen mi oren santoi bevalum. Kermi vakoroch nur hoek mingawak. Ganina koikja honingana. O Arun's got a two and matter. O Arun's got a two and matter. To hein Arun's got a two and matter. Gareta hoekruk hachi en fanjerkan. Gurmi bastatje man gaf mi alleen. Het ook garik se karik biawach. Ach biar bian jou tang mo varel. Na bisa naam show en tang nen gawef. O Arun's got a two and matter. O Arun's got a two and matter. To hein Arun's got a two and matter. Gareta hoekruk hachi en fanjerkan. No nation guasa chi woingan vala. Bipotich gautan en kjalar miawak. Gataik minater. Leikan en gawi. Hamisha daus kan en kaincha menki. O Arun's got a two and matter. O Arun's got a two and matter. To hein Arun's got a two and matter. Gareta hoekruk hachi en fanjerkan. Harsari buam sa haikuan ganlanep. Is eentje hein kavami fawing. Kavamin drast. Aun en kate parish. Kunjachki Gaelic and hacha shawi. O Arun's got a two and matter. O Arun's got a two and matter. To hein Arun's got a two and matter. Gareta hoekruk hachi en fanjerkan. Is tu chatriana hachi en matter. Gareta stories arain mo viawak. Ach tu vi boyach. Gan vos gan varel. Janina voro bachlauch na herik. O Arun's got a two and matter. O Arun's got a two and matter. To hein Arun's got a two and matter. Gareta hoekruk hachi en fanjerkan. Shinakabe.
Oh, tapalet gomód a verach. Vegetowch, gomabria, marisage. Tapalet. A verach. I was just, why did you pick that song?
Well, first of all, because of this idea that this Angus, well, this is from the bard's perspective, that he had enough and then he went looking for more. And so I've been really thinking about that a lot. And also because of the moment when I learned this song was a very special time for me. I was at Peter Jack McLean's house and singing the song, and there's something, sorry?
I was just going Peter
in
McLean.
Rear Christmas Island.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was a wonderful tradition bearer. He spent many years in Boston, came back to Cape Breton, back to his family farm in Rear Christmas Island, and was like so many of these tradition bearers, really so incredibly generous. Like you could show up and be as ignorant as, well, whatever. And they're still so willing to share with you these songs. And as it happened on this particular day, I had one of these moments, which I kind of call, I don't know what you call them. I call them kind of my Technicolor moments, where it's like in The Wizard of Oz, when you're in black and white and then things go to color and you understand something brand new. And it quite often happens with these tradition bearers, that you're going along in your path and you think you know what you know, and then they say something and you're like, oh, never thought of that. So I was talking to Peter and we were talking about the song, and he was telling me about the song, and I was kind of feeling, as I often did with him, like that he just knew his place in the world. Like he just had a very, and that could be a generational thing, could be the age difference, but whatever it was, I have this feeling so often with these singers that they just kind of knew where they sat in the world, and they were very comfortable with that. Like there was no kind of angst about it in a way. Anyway, so we started talking about, the only thing Peter was angry about at that time was that when he was going to school in Rear Christmas Island, he was punished at school for speaking Gaelic. And what got him really mad was that the school teacher was a fluent Gaelic speaker from the neighborhood. And after her putting him in the corner with his nose to the wall for speaking his own language at school, which every other child, that was their first language too, she would come every night to his mother's house to learn songs. She was a singer.
Imagine,
and so then we got on this topic about how his house every night would be full of people who would come and learn these songs. So so he got over the little bit of anger stuff. And I said to him, and this is about what do we leave behind and what's enough. So I said to him, I was like so enthralled with this idea of like people just coming, no electricity, no television, no nothing. They would just bring out songbooks and scrapbooks, and people would sit for hours.
I think she froze. Did we lose her? Oh, she'll come back. I hope she makes her way back. We just got it. We're just in the middle of that story.
Anyways, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Okay. Maybe if you turn your video off.
Yeah, okay. Anyways, I'm gonna finish that little. I'll turn off my video if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah.
If anybody else feels like turning off their video, that might help the situation for me too. Anyway, so Peter Jack said, I said to him, that's so wonderful. I wish I could go back to those days when people just gathered and sang songs and so on. And he looked at me, and Peter was always rocking in his rocking chair. And he looked at me and he said, oh, maybe. He said, yeah, well, penicillin was pretty good. And then he said, I guess having a man missillet and telephone. I'm pretty fond of the telephone. So that just struck me as like nostalgia is one thing, but it's like, what do we choose to bring forward that's really good? And what have we left behind that was really good in the interest of those? And that was one of those moments where I just had that moment of like, oh yeah, think again, Mary Jane.
Well, you did bring those songs forward and had lots of sessions, Mary Jane, of singing in your home and community. And I was wondering, that sounds like a moment where you might feel like, that was enough, like, all was right in the world sitting with Peter McLean. But do you have any other moments that you can think of, or another moment that speaks to you where you felt you had enough? And I mean that in a good way, like that things were going well.
I've had enough. Yeah, I think there's a few things I've been thinking about, and one of them was my parents are both from Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. My father was a chemical engineer, and we lived a lot in Ontario and different places. And then ended up in Montreal when I was 15. And when I was in my 20s, I moved back to Nova Scotia, and I had no real plan, no real money, nothing. But what I did end up having was a beautiful place to live and a big garden. And I just remember standing out, and apple trees and all of these things. And I just remember realizing that when I was in the city, and this is just maybe I think I just had this one day when I just thought, oh, I don't really need anything. I need enough to eat. I need stimulation. I need all those things. And that was a very pivotal moment for me. Like, that never changed after that. I think no matter what I had after that, or what I could have had after that, was always colored by that one moment of just realizing that I'd been in kind of a rat race. And once I got out of it, I felt so free. The other moment was when I was 15 and shaved my head because I wanted to be a punk rocker at school, and nobody liked it, but that was also a very freeing moment. So these pivotal moments happen. And sometimes it's just allowing yourself to be that, to let go. And I suppose in some ways I wouldn't have thought about it that way, but it's just a matter of like, I think I'm very lucky in the way I was raised and the things I was taught, that I had the freedom to just say no to what I was being sold. I feel like turning on my video because it feels a bit weird to not be seeing people.
Yeah, try it again. Try it again, for sure.
And I think another big moment for me was much earlier than that. I was about 7 or 8, and my mother comes from quite a well-off family in Halifax, and my father comes from quite a very working class family in Cape Breton. And during the 1930s, or 1920s, 1930s, my grandfather built a little cabin. So he worked at the steel plant in Sydney. He came from Myra, a rural area, but he built a cabin so they could move his family back out of the city, because he only had one day of work a week and a big family to feed. So they moved out so they could have a cow and chickens and all those things. And moving forward, when I was about 7, we were sitting in this little cabin where I realized that he and his 6 siblings had all been living, and it's very small. And I looked at him, and I lived in really suburbia most of the time, and quite, my father was we lived, next to the bank manager, between, this, it was always like that. Like, we were management class people. And I didn't know anything different. But I knew I loved my grandparents. I knew that was their lifestyle. I was sitting with my father at the table having breakfast one day, and I looked at him and said, "Dad, were you poor?" Because it struck me was this poor? And he said and he took his time. He always took his time when you asked him a question. And he looked at me, he said, "Well, I guess you could say we were poor," he said, "but I never thought we were poor because we always had enough to eat. And our father didn't drink his paycheck."
Yeah.
And so it changed my whole perspective. I was like, oh, well, poor isn't really what I thought about being poor. Yeah. So he had this idea of poor was just having enough. Right. Poor, he didn't think it was poor because they had everything they needed.
Someone commented, we weren't poor, we just didn't have any money.
Exactly.
Yeah, they had lots of other things. I'm just going to ask something about something I'm just thinking of right now, Mary Jane. I think, do you only sing in Gaelic? Really?
I've only recorded in Gaelic.
Okay.
I have sung in English for if it's a finale or something. I'm not, I'm not against English. I speak it fluently.
But and what would it be about it, like in a sense that would be enough when you perform and put out CDs? Did some people say to you, well, why don't you record in English as well, or perform
All
songs in English? Did
kinds of
they ever
people
come?
said that to me.
Yeah.
All kinds of people said that to me. And I think for me, it was that those songs feel so different than English songs to me, or the
Mhm.
context or the voice that I sing them in. The voice I sing in English feels quite different to me than the voice I sing in Gaelic. And I also think this doesn't have to do with leór, but I think also with the fact that once I started doing it, I felt a huge obligation to
Uh-huh.
honor the tradition and to not use it in any way, but to honor it completely and fully. And I loved it. And it's not being a martyr, it was a passion. So it wasn't a thing where I felt like I'm going to, save Gaelic by singing Gaelic songs. It was something I really loved to do, but I also felt like somehow I couldn't make them sit together.
Mhm.
I knew one person who sat me down and told me that I was foolish for doing this was Jim Watson. Very,
Foolish.
very early on, who was a big mentor of mine. At first, we had one conversation about it. He's like, "Are you sure you don't want to put English songs?" He's like, "You're kind of crazy putting out a CD of all Gaelic songs. Where's that going to get you?" I was like, "I don't know, but that's what feels good to
That's
me. There's
interesting.
where I'm
I don't
going."
know.
Yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, I just one more question I want to bring Anne into this. But I was wondering, when you're working on language and lyrics and you're collecting songs, so you're looking at a lot of songs that are composed in Nova Scotia. So what are the uh, what are the themes? Like, what are the kind of things that people wrote about or composed? I guess they were mostly composed orally, but what were they singing about? What are the themes in
Well,
them?
I mean, of
And
course,
did
many, many, many themes, like a lot of laments and a lot of things, but love songs, sailing songs. But if we want to talk about the theme for tonight, I've been thinking about this a lot, and plus I had an extra week, so I could even think about it more. And thinking about what are the songs that are, there's so many songs in praise of place. So local songs that would be praising the place, and what people got from the place. Like they got enough of this, they got enough of, like, there were deer in the hills, there was enough food to be gotten from the land. But then as you see the cash economy start to come in, so starting in the 1890s and then into the early 20th century, you start to see a lot of, and maybe they existed before this, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of scholars on this call who can correct me, but what I noticed is that you start to see these songs show up, like Odin and Fasten. So the songs to the fashions, which is making fun of people going in and buying the fancy clothes. Or the one I saw today, Odin and Fasten, was about making fun of captains of local boats who are painting their boats bright colors. And he called them slaves because they were slaves, I guess, slaves to the fashion, and talking about,
mm,
talking about how people would show up with their shoes at church instead of moccasins, and their feet were frozen and theirs were warm. So you start to see this kind of reaction against
mm,
changes. But then again, it brings to mind, like, what's an improvement and what isn't. So probably shoes were not an improvement over moccasins. But yeah, I think that's what's interesting, is that what you really start to see is people, and you could call it nostalgia, and it might be nostalgia, but you see it also, like, in things like songs against temperance movements, like by bards who believe that the
mm,
still was a great thing to keep going, the poitín or the moonshine or whatever,
mm,
and
mm,
making fun of people. And I think part of it is their reaction against people being kind of acquisitive, like wanting stuff, and that wasn't their way. So yeah,
mhm,
I feel conflicted about it. Like sometimes I feel like, oh, you're just being a stick in the mud, but on the other hand, what they were doing was kind of really not very meaningful. Like if you're going into town to buy a bonnet, what's the use of it? I don't know.
mhm.
There's lots of discussion to be
They were
had.
very
I think
practical.
I think it'd be a whole other
Yeah.
session to just look at these songs that started showing up in the early 20th century and later, of people talking about people not behaving like the Gaels of old. So what did that mean?
Mhm.
But it really is almost always tied to this cash economy, about people acquiring things.
Change, yeah, yeah. Thanks
Yeah.
for that, Vadak. I just I wanted to bring Anne into the conversation. Welcome, Anne. I was going to come as a tattoo, is it? Yes.
Well, Samig Amai agus is an fleisure I bheith I bhfuir dáanta enough. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight. Agus Mágat as an cuire. Thank you for the invitation. It's lovely to be here. I feel quite nervous actually. You're all so far away and it's a different culture, but I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you for saying yes to come on. And I know it's late in Ireland, and plus you took a leap. I just emailed Anne out of the blue and said I'm interested in the book you've written, and I saw a lecture she gave, and she mentions the word leór and means enough and plenty. And then as I started looking at your work, Anne, it was really really important work I was seeing, and I thought it'd be wonderful to have you here to talk more about it. Before we get into that, though, I was wondering if you'd just tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you live in County Kildare, and did you grow up there in that part of Ireland?
I grew up in Dublin, just 20 kilometers to the east, but I've lived here since 1980. So, I've lived here longer than any other time. I'm in my 60s now. I've had a sort of varied work life, mostly involved in education of various kinds, in second level schooling, and then in adult and community education, and most recently through the university. But I've done a lot of freelance work. I didn't stay in any particular job for too long, because and in about 4 years ago, I took early retirement. I was 58. I took early retirement from a permanent job on a small pension, just so I could really follow my own agenda more. I had a lovely job in university. People thought I was crazy. But actually I wanted to just follow more closely my own agenda, which is very much around enough in many ways. So yeah, I suppose I came. Enough has been a passion for me, really. The leór, enough, we pronounce it slightly differently in Irish, leór. But I first came across the idea when I was about 14. I was quite a pudgy teenager. I was having weight problems, and we're having lunch with, I'm the oldest of 5 children, and we were having lunch one day, and my mother asked my little sister, who was about 7 at the time, would she like some more dessert? And my sister just said, no, I have enough. That was really, I think, the first time I, as an individual, thought about the concept of enough. I mean, I was astounded, because here was this child, 7 years younger than me, whom I took care of and so on. And she knew more about stopping eating than I did, who was having those problems. And that moment has stuck in my head. But then I suppose over time, I began to realize that there were other people, that enough was more of a philosophy and a way of looking at the world. And as I got older and became more interested in politics, I became interested in the work of an ecological economist called Richard Douthwaite, so an Englishman living here in Ireland, in the west of Ireland. And in the 1980s, he was researching and wrote a book on called The Growth Illusion. And it was really about how economic growth is good up to a point, but then after a certain point of expansion and extraction, it really isn't good anymore. It's actually uneconomic growth at a certain point. And just over time, I suppose, I became more and more aware of the work that had been done in ecological economics and so on. And I then joined the group that you mentioned, FASTA, and FASTA is the Irish word for in the future. Maybe it's the same word in Gaelic Narrative. And Richard was one of the founders of that. And so really the whole work of FASTA around sustainability is centered on enough. And then I began to realize that so many of the movements in the world that are trying to, to restore justice and to bring about ecological stability. At their heart, they have this concept of limits, sufficiency, enough, what needs to contract and what needs to grow. It's not always, I think, enough isn't always about, for many of us in the kind of developed Western world, it is about cutting back or letting go. But we also have to realize that there are people in the world who just don't have enough. So it's always about what needs to shrink and what needs to grow in any particular context. And another seminal moment for me was in when was it? Probably the late 90s. I read the book called Your Money or Your Life, which some of you might know. It was written by two Americans called Vicky Robin and Joe Dominguez. And it was really about putting enough into practice in your personal life so that you could achieve sort of financial independence, not necessarily being wealthy, but just having enough money to live by your values. And it was absolutely mind-blowing for me. So I really began to write more about enough then. And in 2009, I published the book that you held up there a moment ago, Enough is Plenty. I wrote it in a way to learn and to bring things together for myself. And I suppose I could have kind of continued writing about that and so on. But after that, I really wanted then to put wheels on some of those ideas. So I became involved in starting the farm, and I became involved in the basic income movement, and continuing with the work of FASTA around other projects. So I've spoken for too long. I should you get back.
Well, that's a good summary, Anne. Thank you for that. And one thing I was wondering, you've learned Gaelic yourself. You didn't learn it. You learned it as an adult or when in school. Mm-hmm. And do you see any connection yourself between your own Gaelic language in Ireland and this philosophy and practice of enough?
Well, for me, you see, enough is about several things. It brings together the whole notion of ecology and ethics and aesthetics and economics. So if you look at those things, particularly in healthy ecological systems, you have a lot of diversity. So I think it's absolutely essential that we don't become monolingual, that we have a diversity of languages in the world, and particularly the languages that are connected to the kind of indigenous knowledges that exist in the world, because they contain such richness of knowledge about the things like Mary Jane was talking about, the knowledge of place, the knowledge of ecology, and the knowledge of nature. And if we just let, the big languages, English and Spanish and Chinese, dominate totally, then we're just going to become monocultural. And we have to, so it's not just Gaelic, it's all the other minority languages. But of course, where I'm living, Gaelic is the really so important, and it connects us to the land and to it helps us to do what Mary Jane was talking about, to engage in looking at the very best of the traditions without lapsing into some kind of nostalgia or desire to restore some glorious past that actually didn't exist really, and to bring forward the best of the traditions in ways that are appropriate for today. So I do think the whole language thing is about diversity, and it's so good, just even from a point of view of neuroplasticity. We should all be learning multiple languages. It's just good for us to do that on a personal level as well. So the whole notion of enough has so many multiple dimensions on the personal level, for us as consumers, for us as citizens, and for civil society, that it brings so much together. I see somebody's putting something about basic income in the chat.
Yeah, they're asking questions about the basic income. I see some and how that ties in with, obviously, so people have enough. Have enough money. Yeah. I was wondering, like when you talk about enough and it's having limits, and some people might see that as, well, either not very exciting or not very possible, you know, that we want to be creative. And if you're creative, you want to have, you know, that it might be seen as something not creative or not expansive. It's contracting, it's like penny pinching. So I'm just wondering if you wanted to speak to that, you know, and
Yeah.
putting enough into practice.
Yeah. I mean, I
What you
think
would have to say.
I do think that modern English has lost a lot of the richness of enough, although of course we do have, you know, does contain the phrase enough is as good as a feast and other things like that.
Mhm.
But in modern English, I think enough is often, and limits are concerned with mediocrity and, as you say, penny pinching and being kind of, you know, not very joyful in life. But I think, and sort of eat your bran and do things that are good for you, even though you don't really want to do them. But actually, if you think of nature works with limits. If something in nature grows too big, it collapses. You know, even cancer is a growth of cells that are growing too big. So the whole, also, if you work with a notion of aesthetics, a picture or a song has to have boundaries. You know, the spaces between the notes in the music are as important as the notes. If you let a picture exceed its frame, it doesn't have it doesn't have an aesthetic value, or it's so I think there's a real need to say what again, as I mentioned earlier, what do we need to put limits on and what do we not need to put limits on? Like we shouldn't be limiting our personal development. We shouldn't be limiting our cultural creativity. But we should be, we really do need to limit, we need to live within the ecological capacity of the planet. And that means that there are limits at the widest parameters of the system. There have to be limits. But then within that, we can be you know, endlessly creative within the limits for safety. I mean, scientists are telling us, we know the science now about fossil fuels and biodiversity collapse and so on. So we really do need to live within limits. So I think also, I think Mary Jane alluded to it, and some of the comments in the chat have alluded to it. You know, we need to be telling ourselves new stories about what wealth is. It's not just about material possession. And in fact, if you have too many material things, too many possessions, they can weigh you down, and they end up owning you instead of you owning them. You know, you have to maintain them, you have to look after them, you have to store them, and so on. So I think, again, there's no blueprint in enough. There's no blueprint around limits. Everyone has different ways of looking at it, but there are system limits that we do need to take into account within nature.
Thank you. I just have one final question, maybe for you and Mary Jane both. What would your wildest dream be for a world with enough?
Yeah,
Everyone.
It's always a hard question, isn't it? It actually, though, you know, it does relate back to the question we started with, that we all discussed in the breakout groups. My wildest dream, you know, is really that there would be a global culture of enough. It doesn't have to always be called enough. You know, people can use different terms for it, but that we would all recognize what's enough in material terms. The phrase "enough is enough" is really, I think, refers to material limits, and then that there would be enough for everybody in terms of distribution. Because to me, enough is about sharing the wealth of the world, the wonderful resources that we have, but it's about dividing them out evenly. And so I would really like to see that people in their personal lives would be having these conversations about enough and trying to put them into practice, that we would be in civil society, that acting as citizens, we'd be, you know, that would be at the heart of what we're doing, but also that states would really be looking at the whole concept of sufficiency and enough for everyone, because there are things that we can do as individuals, and there are things that we do in our smaller communities and as groups, but there are also things that only governments or states can do, representing the community at large, things that they can put in place at system levels. So that's what I'd love to see, is the enabling of the partner state as well as civil society and individuals all having these conversations about go leór. So I want to hear what Mary Jane has to say.
Mary Jane?
Well, yeah, I think that's really beautiful. I think we've taken this to, you know, I came at this, I think, from a very Gaelic song centric place in some ways, but my own experience in community. And thinking about leór, I was thinking about it as like globally leór. I noticed that Alistair McCush, one of our co-conspirators here tonight, has written down that leór to him meant sharing with others. So I think that that's another way of looking at leór. And then unless we have leór for everyone, is there leór enough for us? So I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thought. Yeah, to think about. And I think it's, you know, it reminds me when I was a teenager, I took this geopolitical course, and of course it was all about like how 60% of the world don't have enough water. I had this like kind of breakdown at one point, and I was tutoring in a learning center at the college where I was, and the person there happened to be a Buddhist, and he just said to me, he's like, look, you just have to think about what you do is going to make a change in the world. He said, you know, you're 17 years old, you're not going to solve the problems in Brazil, but he said you have to take on that everything you do has an effect on what's going to happen. So think about it that way. So I think if we all lived leór, but with leór, not just enough for us, but for everybody. Started to sound like I'm winding up a sermon, and I don't want to do that. But I really loved what you said, Anne. It was lovely.
Yeah, but you see, it can sound a little bit like a sermon sometimes. Not that I'm saying you do, but it is at the heart of all the great wisdom traditions, you know. So we have heard it in our churches, and we have heard it from spiritual leaders as well as secular leaders. And in fact, I sometimes think if we were truly secular, if we really, really loved the world in that sense of, you know, secular being of the world, we were truly materialistic, we would be living by enough, because we would value every single thing that's in the world, every material thing that's in the world. So I love what you said.
You know what? I don't know why but this is reminding me of a neighbor of mine. I'm not going to say his name, but he was a great neighbor who, well, anyways, he was on a kind of a spree one day, and he'd get on these sprees, and he showed up here, and he said, "I got a bottle in the truck. I'm going to bring it in." I was like, "No, come in. I'm going to make you a sandwich and a cup of tea." And he came in, and I had all these kind of Atney Reader magazines and different. And one of them was on young ecologists. So he was reading that while I was preparing the tea, and I came out and brought him his tea, and he threw the magazine down in disgust, and he said, "You don't need that." He said, "You just need to plant your own potatoes." Which I thought was actually quite brilliant. I think we're just, you just need to be kind of connected to where you are and where you're getting your food and all of those things too. It's like there's a big, and realize that you can't just drive to the store every time you need something, or one shouldn't.
Well, that Tapaleth and G. Shaku, thanks so much. I really enjoyed talking to you and to you both. And we're going to go back in the breakout rooms now, and we're going to get a chance to reflect on some of the things we heard in the conversation today. So I'm just going to, and we'll put some questions in the chat for you as well. And this time, the breakout rooms are going to be all, they'll be in English, and we'll take some time to reflect on questions that Natasha's putting in the chat. So we just want to talk about what struck you or what moved you from the conversation that you heard, and what resonated with you. And does it remind you of any stories, or does it take you to any moments in your life, and maybe share that with the people in your rooms? So we're going to go there. And I feel like I cut you both off. We could have kept talking for a little longer, but we only have so much time tonight. Maybe another time. We'd love to have you back in.
I have to fix this.
But we're going to go to the
learn some of the songs.
Please do. Okay, we're gonna go in the rooms now, and we'll be.
Were you the missing person in our group? There were only two of us.
Yes, I think so.
There were only two in the group I was in too. We were missing Beck or Beth, I guess.
Yeah.
Hello, Edith. How are you? Oh, Andrew's
Hi. Hi, what happened? Did we get moved around?
I don't know.
Okay, are we all back now? I think so. Now, that didn't feel like it was long enough. I feel in our group, there's a lot to talk about on that subject. There's so much, I think, so much more we can talk about. But right now, we're going to share a bit in the chat, as we usually do, answer a few questions. So Natasha's put in the chat some questions that we think that we can reflect on and answer. We're going to have to take about 5 minutes here to do that. So the questions are, what surprised you in what you heard or said? What connections are you making? And is there an action that you're inspired to take? So just think about it for a bit, and we can share in the chat. And what we do at the end is we keep all the chat that's been shared, and we keep the chat, and then we use it and share it on the website so that we can refer to it later. Lots of comments there. Just keep them coming. It's time for us to maybe wind things down, but please do keep the comments coming. They're really important and they're lovely to have for sure. One thing we're going to do, what we're going to do now is ask Mike Kennedy if he would come on and talk to us a little bit about what's going to be, what's on for next Friday for the Edhieli.
Right. Anach den Bishan the Bruinery Nus Brendan McNeil, I guess Rodney Donlach. Next week, our subject is, or the title of their session is "It Takes a Village," and that's obviously the a kind of a twist on the old saying, "It takes a village to raise a child." So you know, the village nurtures the child, and at time the child will nurture the village, and hopefully that's an ongoing cycle. So what we're going to do next week is kind of take a little stock of where our Gaelic village is. What is it that nurtures our sense of identity and community? And is it enough for us to be able to pass something meaningful on to the next generation? So joining me for that discussion will be Angus Brendan McNeil and Rodney MacDonald, who will give us perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic. Angus Brendan is a native Gaelic speaker who was raised in Barra, and he's worked as a Gaelic reporter. He was a Gaelic medium school teacher in Lochaber, and he's currently the Member of Parliament for the Western Isles. So he has a very intimate understanding of life in the last remaining Gaelic speaking communities in Scotland. And then Rodney MacDonald is a fiddler and a step dancer from Mabou, Cape Breton. And Mabou is, even within Cape Breton, I think would be fair to say, is kind of regarded as a very a stronghold of dance and music traditions. And Rodney's family is particularly noted, both sides of the family, as fiddlers, pipers, dancers who trace their roots back to Bray Lochaber. And Rodney is also the president of the Gaelic College, so is very, very strongly connected to helping us try to foster a way to pass on something to the children of the next generation. So I think that will be a very interesting look at where our community is at on either side of the Atlantic. So I hope you'll be able to join us, and I think it'd be nice to get your input as well. What is your sense of what connects us?
At the vehicle. Big shit that'll be really wonderful. And I hope everybody will be able to join us next Friday. Be sure to register so that we can keep in touch with you, and especially if we run into any winter storms and have to cancel. So we have your email. So I hope you'll all be able to join us next week. So we're going to sign off before we go. I think Mary Jane's going to sing us another song to sign us off. But before she does, I want to say thank you. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I know that it's hard sometimes to join these things, but usually when we do, we're really happy we've done that. So I appreciate you all making the effort and coming out tonight and joining our talk. And I want to thank our Edhieli team that we work with, Mike and Ian and Bernadette and Margie, Susan Spakowski. Thank you so much. And thanks Susan and Natasha on tech. And of course, I want to thank our special guests, Anne Ryan and Mary Jane. And I hope this we will continue to be in touch on this really important subject. And I hope that yeah, maybe we'll have you back again sometime, or you visit us in Nova Scotia. So Nevadak, I'm so happy you're just down the road and we can visit. So, but tonight, why don't you just sing us off with a song?
Yeah, I'm going to sing a song which, well, there's some debate, but I think it was composed by Jonathan McKinnon, who is a great publisher of Gaelic songs, and it's called Ellinggotten and Bountinard. I think Ian's going to put the words up in the chat. So anyways, I chose the song because it's just a song of praise of place. And he's just saying, many waves will hit the shore before you'd make me leave this place. And he talks about all the richness of the landscape and one little pair of verses that I really love is he says, although the winter's hard, the spring will come and we'll be happy when we get our crops. And he says, you know, in this glen where we are, where we're making our living, there's no want. And the king could not be as happy as we are. So here we go. Ellen garam nam biant in archi moguches chir mograi shimmer town of Wallestrai manier mi by kadachag. Chid is alia hafan grain, kreich is clean is ranch and bray, kalyet wuna mile gate, san coin your quays their color. Lingaram. Biantin archi moguches chid mograi, shimmer town of Wallestrai, manier mi fire kadachag. Fyrtig am bin gaurig voort, gyn jedig klubben tua, ikke saunig buana wood, le koer is boin ga talachag. Helen garam nam biantin hart, cheer moguches cheer mograi, shimmer town of Wallestrai, manier mi fire kadachag. Ounce a glounce a velshin heen, fine bay is jach and cheat, Chanya jade is or no cheat, Chanyellery hosanary. Ellen gadam nam biantin art, cheer moguches cheat mograi, shimmer town of Wallestrai, manier mi pa kadachag. It's not the end, but that's as far as I can go right now. Sorry.
Tapelet werk. Tapelet. Tapeli vula. Dankjewel.
Fashion life. I'm fighting all the dunya. So nice to see people.
Thank
you. Thanks everybody from the team for putting this together. It was really, really very lovely.
Thank you.
I guess mad daking, Rob.
Mae daicen. Mae daicen cwydioch.
Gwneud o.
Eisiau na sianachus. Ac i weld.
Ia'n y glef. Ik maak trouwens een laten jongen maar op het roost.
Dankjewel, Albert.
Dankjewel. Waar zit iemand nog gediend? Bij mij snuiven het leór van een jachten. Ja, leór, kiel gegonzen. Kemara ha njoin ook. Kemara ha ietsen